I may not know how to um, turn turn our remarkable agricultural system in the U.S. to grow America's biofuels. But there's people that do, and if we can get the right people together and we can make the case and we have a sense of urgency, because that sense of urgency is really critical.
And so let's talk about where some of this ambition came from, right? You've had a number of really interesting roles, but you were the chief innovation officer at USAID, the first chief innovation officer.
First
Is that
one,
right?
yeah.
Right. And so talk about an organization with big ambition against intractable problems. Can you tell me a bit about what you learned in that role? And how you're kind of applying it today, whether with the Decade Project or elsewhere.
Yeah. So, President Kennedy decided to create the USAID in addition to the space race. And the first country that was a customer or a client of USAID was South Korea. At the time, in the early 60s,
I
it's
didn't
hard to
know that.
believe today that South Korea had a lower per capita income than sub-Saharan Africa. And so, what I like to say is that across all of the areas that USAID did, democracy, food safety, rule of law, entrepreneurship, a whole plethora, that what USAID was about was creating more South Koreas and not North Koreas. And I think that is the dilemma. So when I was the first chief innovation officer of USAID, we operated in 100 countries, but we were physically in 80 countries. And as Secretary Robert Gates, who was the Secretary of Defense under under President Bush, George W. Bush, and at the beginning Obama, said, I'd much rather have USAID go in there with boots on the ground to stabilize and make countries more prosperous than to have to send the men and women or sons and daughters in the United States as troops.
Oh,
So
100%.
these foreign service officers take this charge incredibly serious and have been some of the most courageous people, whether it's on the ground in Afghanistan or in Somalia, or it's in Kenya and Indonesia, that you have ever seen in your life.
Well, and what was it like kind of coming in with a founder and entrepreneur mindset, right? Roles that you had held in your career into a governmental organization under the title of innovation. What was that like? What did you struggle with? And how did you get some of your big wins?
So I think that part of it was that, I say, let me start at the end and then I'll tell you about the struggles. So I look back on that time and say, even for somebody who sets the bar high and swings for the fences, I am awed by what we were able to do. And it's because there was such enormously talented people, but they had structural problems, so we did amazing things in the Haiti earthquake response. And that was the very first week of my job.
Wow.
And I watched when there was crisis, how these people just did amazing things. I mean, 2 minutes after the head of a Coast Guard cutter saw on his radar that the earthquake had happened in Haiti, he turned around with no orders and headed there to see if they could help, you know, and you just saw the force,
Unbelievable. That makes me tear up a little. Like, I'm not even kidding.
it does every time I think about it. It really does. The force for good that America has historically been is just amazing. What I like to say is that 130, a lot of kids under the age of 5 used to die as well as moms. And since 1990, there are 130 million people globally that are alive today as a result. As a result of the shutting down AID, we have now 16 million moms who, like me, had conditions where they increased the ability to that were likely the risk that we would die at birth, and 11 million kids a year that if they don't get life-saving medicine in the first 2 years will. And so I think that the good news was you can't think of a better mission on the
Right.
face of the earth than these people did. The bad news is it was like there was arteriosclerosis. It was like the structural problems. We set up systems that worked in the Cold War era or worked in the former Soviet Union. And I think that you develop an institution with all the pieces around it, and it's hard to change. And so when
And
you're
and
able,
that's gonna be something that I think is probably familiar to a lot of folks that are listening, who even in the private sector, right? I mean, you get sclerosis, you get classic innovator's dilemma, right? Efficiency toward one problem where the context has changed. So I'm really curious, how you thought about that, how you thought about kind of agitating and railing for change versus taking advantage of the structures, because
right.
it's a tough problem.
Yeah, and Ian, you're absolutely right. I mean, the reason why every single time there's a structural change in our economy, some of the most iconic companies bite the dust
They're gone.
because it is not a problem just in the public sector. It is absolutely the problem in the private sector. As I like to say, when Amazon blew onto the thing, you had Barnes and Noble survive, but Borders, who had been actually the innovator in the books and music space, went belly up. So
Yep.
none of this is spared, whether you're in the public or private sector. But I believe, remember, I told you that I have a mantra that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. And there are people inside our large companies, inside the federal government, inside cities, who fundamentally believe that it's possible. And so what I did is I provided them the political cover, I provided a good strategy, but they were the ones that filled in the blanks
Yeah.
and to
With
do
a
it
fundamental belief that it's possible. Sorry,
exactly.
that is actually a great line, right?
Exactly.
When you have that, when you understand that, yes, this thing I want to do should be possible in the world, well, at that point, it's almost an inevitability.
Exactly. And so I can just tell you on topic after topic after topic what kind of things we were able to do in 3 to 5 years that would just take your breath away. And so that informs, listen, are there days in which I think I'm crazy to do the Decade Project, or I feel the weight of the challenge, like 250 or 2,500 pounds on my shoulders? Yes. But I hearken back to the belief that we've taken on every bit as tough a challenge before. And there are innovators all over, and there are people who care deeply. I may not know how to turn our remarkable agricultural system in the US to grow America's biofuels. But there's people that do. And if we can get the right people together and we can make the case and we have a sense of urgency, because that sense of urgency is really critical.